to church in the basement of a house. We were supposed to keep quiet about it. Otherwise, the KGB would find the pastor who had escaped from communist Hungary and torture him. So we were not to talk to our neighbors or friends about what went on there. We were in Northwest Indiana. A sane person would know by the red-orange wall-to-wall carpeting that something was off. We descended into church. Those hard metal chairs at the front of the room, to the right of the pastor's Yamaha keyboard, stood a pulpit, where sometimes pastor would talk, but more often his wife, Mrs. Penny. She would stand there, big, billowy tent dress all around her, legs like trunks of an oak, and yell, "Sex should be only for procreation, not pleasure." Mrs. Penny had procreated with the pastor at least 7 times for 7 children. She had a pink face from the exertion of standing. And my mother, a nurse, said her blood pressure was sky high. There was a big wooden cross behind the pulpit, and a crown of thorns hung off of it like a coat rack. Pastor Penny would start off the service with some jazz rendition of "When the Saints Go Marching In," or "Great is the Lord," and Deacon Laurent and my dad and 2 other people would sing 4-part harmony. Every time Pastor Penny played the song "David Danced Before the Lord," there went my father hopping up and down. His name was David. It was required, I thought. It was a very small church, maybe 3 families at most. It seemed like mine was the only family that had only 4 kids. All of the rest of the family had 7+, and when they made it to school, I was happy at first. That meant that at least I wouldn't have to go to heathen schools with their sex education and short gym shorts. It meant that I could read as many stories by Louisa May Alcott and Little House on the Prairie. It also meant that I could have free reign, just as long as I did not tell anyone I was going to school there at Christian Ministries International School. I studied from antiquated math books, learned the multiplication tables by heart. Everyone said I was smart, and they compared me to their own children. I really hated that. Don't ever do that. It only made their children despise me. Their children told me, "Wait until we get you alone." And I made sure that I was never alone. I would go and read in the bathroom of that house with the door locked and leave as soon as my mom came to pick me up. Always, though, I felt the pastor's eyes boring into me. He spoke with a Hungarian accent and had big, pale blue eyes. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. I didn't know how to speak of it. My best friend from school was Shelley. Shelley was blind, but she did things that you wouldn't think blind people would be able to do, like roller skating. She said that she could feel people around her. I hung out a lot at Shelley's house. She prayed fervently for Jesus to heal her, to give her the sight that he had given the blind man in the Bible. No dice. One day at Christian Ministries International School, she asked me, "Do you know how people have sex?" Before I could answer, she put her forefinger through a hole made by her index finger and thumb. That's how. All day, she thrust her finger into that hole. Shelley Laurent had thick, long brown hair, a sharp tongue, and a fine mind. At a sleepover, we listened to the brothers Karamazov on her books for the blind tape player. We would say these Russian names and giggle at sounding so communist. Fyodor, I would say in a booming voice. Russian sounds best loud. Vanya, she yelled. Mitya, I bellowed. After listening to the book for a little while, we, feeling guilty for sounding so communist, would play Silverwind, a Christian group that sang in the style of ABBA. Ilya, you know you will win. Ilya, you know you can win. You planted your seeds underground and they'll reach to the sky. Shelley kept a pet rat. We were getting ready for bed and she was holding him. Pet him, he likes pets, she whispered. I gingerly reached for him, but then I noticed so many lumps. What are those? I retreated in horror. Oh, they're from running around in the asbestos. I then remembered the skittering noises I had heard. When we had finished whispering and I was falling asleep, suddenly I felt a claw on my arm. I was so confused and I threw the rat against the wall. But then the rat came back. He wants you to do it again, Shelley laughed. Shelley slept down there in the basement, kind of away from everybody else, and the rest of the kids slept upstairs. It smelled of dirty laundry and urine-soaked diapers of the latest child. I started noticing things that were not quite right at Shelley's house. I couldn't put my finger on it. She seemed eager to have me over, but once I was there, she was withdrawn, and she would not talk to me. Sitting at breakfast the next morning at the Laurents, I noticed Deacon Laurent putting his hand on Shelley's butt and leaving it there. When he went away, I asked Shelley about it. Oh, he does that, she said, giggling nervously. That's gross, I said. My belly hurt. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door of Mrs. Laurent's bedroom, where she lay sleeping at 11:45 a.m. I told her all about it and how weird it made me feel, and Mrs. Laurent had an annoyed look in her deep brown eyes, almost like this had happened before. And then I remembered something Shelley had told me about someone coming into her room at night. 1 minute, I need to get dressed, Mrs. Laurent said. She called from the room, Larry! All I heard was screaming after that. Why? You said you were going to stop. She howled. After that, I went to hide in Shelley's bedroom. I felt like I was to blame. Shelley, get over here, Mrs. Laurent said. She sounded angry. "If you think," Mrs. Lawrence said, and then the door closed, and all I could hear was furious, threatening tone of voice and Shelley crying. Shelley left her mother's room and came downstairs. "Why did you have to be such a blabbermouth?" she said, with tears in her eyes. "I was only trying to help." Mrs. Laurent called my mom and told her that I'd been a bad girl and to come and get me. Mrs. Laurent also told me that I was to pack my bags and to sit on the front stoop. The bright green lawn belied any trouble going on in the house. It reminded me of the Pharisees in the New Testament who cleaned the outside of the cup, but not the inside, so it hid rottenness. And that is how that church was, too. There was molestation going on all around me. And one time during a Bible study, as I descended the stairs in the dark, I felt somebody leap on top of me and feel for my non-existent breasts. There were other boys too, but I kicked and I scratched and I fought and I finally kicked them all in the balls. They didn't try that again. It all came to a head when the deacon's wife, okay, this is kind of confusing over here. So the deacon's wife, Mrs. Laurent, Shelley's mom, and the pastor had a son. So Mrs. Laurent brought the baby to Mrs. Penny, and there was no denying that face with its clear, light blue eyes. Poor Mrs. Penny. Her blood pressure had always been high. I heard that shortly after that, she had a stroke that put her in the nursing home. I was never, to my knowledge, molested in any systematic way. I think the men of the church had decided that I was too much of a big mouth and not to be trusted. If that protected me, I am glad of that. Years later, I asked my dad, "Why did you stay even after it came out about all the molestation?" He said, "As Christians, we're supposed to forgive so that they can do it again." I don't know that they ever did it. Do you believe everything people tell you? Why would they lie? I don't know. For attention? I kept in contact with Shelley sporadically over the phone. She said that she had gone to visit her parents on school break. Michael, the half-brother that Mrs. Laurent and the pastor had, was walking around in his very dirty diaper, shoving his sticky, chubby fist into the honeycomb cereal and screaming whenever he got anywhere near the bath, because that's where it happened. That's where Deacon Laurent molested him. Shelley was the one who called child welfare services on him. Shelley had never been protected, but she was going to protect, even if it cost her her home. She had had enough. I was away from the church and anything to do with Christianity for a long time after that. It's taken a great deal of therapy and healing to come around to the fact that what I grew up in, the church that I grew up in, wasn't Christianity. It was a cult. I guess I have a lot of questions for my Creator when I get to heaven. Why do people hurt people? Is there unforgivable sin? We're supposed to be held to a higher standard. Instead, a lot of people ask God for forgiveness and keep on doing what they were doing before Jesus came into their lives. We can do better. Christians must do better. Yes, I am a Christian who was wounded badly, but I survived the creepiness of the cult that almost engulfed me. I think I am stronger for it. I think something good can even come from that horror. I am not a victim. I am a survivor.
Anna Gasaway, everybody. Give her a hand.